I believe we are ready to get started on our second half of the day. So welcome back, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed that great episode of the Interns podcast. I know I love listening to my fellow interns hear what they have to say about what's going on in the world. So I really hope you all enjoyed that. Be sure to check out our podcast on Spotify. We do have 2 other episodes and we have a couple others in the works. So be sure to check that out. My name is Hannah Alvarez, and welcome to the 2022 International Young Leaders Conference. So far, we have discussed gun violence and COVID-19 and the impact both issues have on our youth. We will now be moving on to our third panel of the day, focusing on the ongoing social inequality within our community. So I'm now going to turn it over to the moderators of this panel, Kennedy and Kirtana.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As mentioned before, my name is Kennedy Holt, and I will be serving as one of your moderators today. I am a student at Shippensburg University.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kirtana Santiana, and I'm a rising sophomore at Cumberland Valley High School. And I am also an intern for the World Affairs Council of Harrisburg. And I would like to welcome you all to our third panel on social inequality. I would like to take a moment for each speaker to introduce themselves. So starting with Mr. Lassiter, then Dr. Sessoms, and Mr. Goodman. Hope I pronounced that right. Thank you.
I think Mr. Lassiter is having trouble getting on the Zoom, so if he comes in, I'll add him in, but you can go on to the next one.
Yeah, it seems like Mr. Lassiter has experienced some technical difficulties, so let's start with Dr. Sessoms.
Correct, it is Dr. Sessoms. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Amber Sessoms. I am by training a school psychologist, over 20 years experience in the field of mental health, and currently, I feel like Beyonce's song came out a year too late, because when you talk about not breaking your soul, I resigned from my job last March and started my own business because I want to make sure that the work that I do, right, when you're aligning yourself with your vision and your purpose, your work environment has to align as well. And I am not for spirit murdering of any sort, especially our children. So that's why I'm in this space to have this conversation with my fellow colleagues. So thank you for having me.
I would like to pass it on to Mr. Goodman.
Hi, everyone. It's great to see everyone and be here with all of you. It's great to be here with you, Dr. Sessoms, my friend. It's really good to see you. And thank you, everyone, the moderators and everyone who's putting on the Young Leaders Conference for the World Affairs Council of Harrisburg. My name is Cole Goodman. I am by trade an activist, community activist, was very involved in Black Lives Matter in 2020, 2021, and ongoing. I also have the honor of being a party elected official. I have now was elected to my second term on Democratic State Committee, representing Dauphin County within the Democratic Party, and I also sit on the executive board of the Democratic Party as well. And then a new hat I just started to wear and don as being the South Central Regional Director for Next Gen America, which is an organization that encourages everyone, but especially college-age students, to get out and register to vote. And we strive to register college students, voter education, which is incredibly important. So it is an honor to be here with all of you, and I'm really excited for the discussion today.
And I would like to toss it back to Kennedy to tell us a little bit about what we're talking about.
Yes. So today we'll be talking about social inequalities. Fortunately, the institutionalized concept of inferiority and inequality of a particular race is ingrained within the foundation of our country, which has transcribed into our educational systems. So would either of you like to speak any more to that?
Kennedy, you were cutting out a little bit for me, but I think you were talking about, can you just summarize that one more time for me? I'm sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So I said the institutionalized concept of inferiority and inequality of a particular race is ingrained within the foundation of our country, which has transcribed into our educational systems. Would you be able to speak any more to that?
Yeah, and can I just say, I think I met you, Kennedy. Did I meet you in Shippensburg?
We met at
I think you're just a sophomore, maybe going into your junior year, just phenomenal young leader. So super proud of you and the work that you're doing. And I'm excited to see you in this environment as well. For me, what I said earlier about spirit murdering, and I think about that, even my own experience being a Black girl growing up in Middletown, right? Like being one of the only ones, that idea, that erasure and that invisibility, and what that says about who I am and what the stories that I tell myself and the stories that people tell me, and how I had to unlearn that, right? At 41, the constant unlearning of that narrative about how I show up as being professional, how I show up thinking I have to work 10 times as hard just to be seen. And all of that is something that really has really harmed me and harmed our community, because we think we have to do so much just to be seen. And I'm like, and my inherently as my dignity is what I want to be known for, like my humanity on the surface. I shouldn't have to do anything for that. So when you're thinking about this idea of erasure and visibility and me having to commodify my labor to be seen, it's even more expounded upon by me being in this Black female body, right? That I have to do more, and that leaves me exhausted. So that idea of now coming into this time of being able to rest and being able to just really dive into being my authentic self. So taking off all of those layers of what I was told I had to be and really understanding what it is to be in my authenticity is huge. So that is what I really try to teach to our kids. And I think more than ever, when I look at, my husband just said this morning, he's like, our 7-year-old is you now, right? Like the boldness and audacity she has at 7 that I wish I had. And I don't want her to lose that, and loving the skin and loving her locks and loving all the things about her. But we, in education, that gets dismantled from our children, particularly children that look me. So I want to really make sure that you can still be who you are and love who you are, even in that setting. But that comes from having people that look like you. That comes from being able to have a story that's told the truth about you, but also not being told that we're just tragic. But there's a lot of pride and joy and innovation that comes from that too. So all of that freedom dreaming and all of that thing that to liberate you, I feel like should be coming from education, but it really has done the opposite. So the work that I do is really trying to make sure that we can cultivate that liberatory journey for our kids and for our staff to be fully seen in who we are.
Thank you. Cole, do you have anything to add to that?
Would you mind repeating the question, please?
Yes. So I said the institutionalized concept of inferiority and inequality of a particular race is ingrained within the foundation of our country, which has transcribed into our educational systems. Would you be able to speak more to that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it is very, as everyone on this call knows, that it's very deeply rooted in our educational systems, and we're seeing it play out in so many ways today. This fake facade of critical race theory, which honestly, really, let's just be honest, is a lie and isn't even a thing, that was weaponized to be political. That is adjunct race, or straight to the point racism in our educational system, and something we're battling today. But also, I could bring up a few points, but I just want to bring up one that I was speaking on with someone yesterday: educational funding, and how that money from our government and from our local leaderships is dispersed throughout communities. There's also deeply rooted racism in that as well, because in many instances you're seeing your more predominantly white and Caucasian schools getting more support, getting more preferential treatment than just taking the state of Pennsylvania into, for example, than some of our inner city, more predominantly Black and brown schools across the Commonwealth and across the United States. So, I mean, racism is like, an air vent. It's trying to get into all these different rooms and seep into all these different corners of our educational system. And it's up to us, I came in on the tail end of the last conversation you had, that's why everyone's like, it's important to get out and vote. it's important to make sure you're electing people that have a knowledge and sensitivity towards racial disparities within our country, to make sure that we are combating the racism that is trying to seep into all of our educational systems.
Thank you, Cole, for that answer. I'll pass back to Kirtan.
I think Dr. Sessoms.
I'm sorry, I muted my mic.
I don't know what was happening.
I'm sorry, I muted my mic. I just put something in the chat. Cole, you just generated something for me, and thinking about when you're talking about this opportunity gap that we have. Research for Action is phenomenal. They do phenomenal work in Pennsylvania. And about a month before COVID hit us, they released this report in January, and it talked about like we are one of the worst in the nation for the opportunity gap. Like third worst in the nation, right? Like, and it talked about exactly what you're saying, Cole, about this idea of like the most affluent areas, school districts are the areas that predominantly are white, right? And those that are low income and suffering are Black and brown communities. And it really did look at that. So I put that link in the chat, but I haven't seen, I'm not sure if they had done any updated recent studies, but that came out and it made a ripple effect. And I was so infuriated because it was so profound, and thinking about COVID and how we talked about, equity and equities. And this study comes out, and what do we do with that, right? It just kind of just went by the wayside. But that really does dig deep into what Cole was talking about. So I wanted to share that.
Thank you, Dr. Sessoms and Mr. Goodman, for your input on social inequality. Do you guys have any final words that you want to say before we open it up to questions from the public?
Before we get to that section, I would just like to say that the fight against social inequality, racial inequality, social justice is a marathon, and it's not a sprint. So one thing that I saw that was a little disheartening is that we were all locked down. Dr. Sessoms remembers this. And we were all locked down. BLM protests were going on. All of the hot, topics were being thrown out there, topics that usually people of color have either been hesitant to speak on, or they have the topics have been covered up in many cases, and voices were silenced. But my point with that is that it can't take just a perfect storm of a pandemic, a lockdown, and everyone being frustrated to, talk about these issues. And that's why I'm so glad we're having this discussion today, because it takes ongoing discussion, it takes ongoing activism, and even takes ongoing things, especially for my Caucasian brothers and sisters who are watching this call, in using your privilege to make sure that when you're seeing social inequality and inequities, that you are standing up and saying that's not right. And, we need to stand together to make sure everyone is lifted up on the same playing field. So we can't fall off when, it doesn't get as spicy, or it doesn't get as, everyone's posting about it and such. We have to keep going in rooting out these inequities as long as it takes. So I just wanted to add that point before we got into that section.
Yeah, honestly, I would, if I may, I would agree with you 100%, Cole. I feel as though in this society, we have a tendency to show performative allyship. And I feel like we need to learn to dissect the racial origins and commonalities between white supremacy and, I guess, like the historical findings of America in the United States of America. So until we really get to that root cause, we're always going to be in the same perpetual existential crisis in which we're in today. So I would agree.
I'm here for Kennedy. But naming that, I think, is so important, right? But that's the harm. So what you're naming is this white supremacist delusion, this culture that we want to be sleeping giants, that, right? So we had that moment, right? What Cole was talking about, that majority of people woke up out of shame, out of guilt, out of what, like you had nothing else to do. So you had to watch TV and watch the heinous murder. I could not watch it. of Brother George Floyd. But thinking about those things and that it turned very performative, that we can still create the story. We can still go back to going to sleep, some of us, right? So who's still doing the work every day? Or BIPOC people are people that have been historically devalued in our society, the backs of us, right? So that is the harm that's continued to be done. And then you have the allies, and I'm not even going to call them co-conspirators, because I don't know. There was something that really went viral a couple weeks ago, Dr. Yaba Blay, if you saw that, when she was talking about, I don't want to ally. So if I call you in the middle of the night and I say, I need you to meet me on the corner, 3 in the morning, it's about to go down. She's like, I don't want thoughts and prayers, right? Like, I want to know that you're with me. Like, I got you, I'm going to be there. And that's the difference. Like, you putting some skin in the game. But what I find in my work, right, when I do workshops, when I do trainings, long-standing trainings, is predominantly white people will say to me, I'm okay with equity as long as it doesn't take anything away from me. And I have to have them dissect us. So tell me more. What do you mean by that? And they start naming, what is it taking away from you? They start naming things like, materialistic things. And I'm like, I'm talking about just the basics that I need to survive, like my belonging, my inherent dignity, the ability to be at ease and not have this psychological trauma that impacts me every day. They don't even recognize that as a form of just being safe, and they want to recognize things. So when I think about these inequalities and these gender gaps and these opportunity gaps, if you looked over COVID, you could see the haves and the have-nots, right? Like the billionaires, and listen, my husband works for Amazon. Like, so that whole thing, I got a package outside of the door. Like, I struggle with that, right? But thinking about the billionaires that made so much money during this pandemic, and then the least of these, the people that are being harmed the most, that are frontline workers, that are people doing the work to make them billionaires, have been on the wayside. And this continues to happen. So we have this idea of that we can look at certain bodies of people and value them more than others. Eddie Glaude talks a lot about that value gap. And who do we value more? Literally, like, your body it's text, it's read as text. Like, you can look at me and there's a story that you've been told about me that you believe because you're never in community with me. And there's a story that we tell ourselves that I have to unlearn. So I just think about that value gap so much, and you see it play out, right? You saw it play out during COVID. You see how we have died by the millions, and yet that's still not enough. You see in even Uvalde, Texas, right? Like a massacre of our little brown babies, and that still is not enough. We still have this narrative that we still say that is okay because I have the right to own guns. I have the right to this, but who are we talking about that has the right? These are the things that are super infuriating and frustrating to me, because we create these stories that we say that we care about our children, that we care about our society, but yet these things continue to show us who we really are. And we have an opportunity now with people like you, these leaders that are saying, this is enough. We can change the narrative of our country. We can write a new story, because democracy is an experiment, and we're failing right now. So we can do this a different way.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. or Dr. Sessoms, for that great input, as well as Mr. Goodman. So I'm now going to answer or give you guys some questions to answer. First being from Sarah, a fellow intern at the World Affairs Council of Harrisburg. So Sarah, you want to ask a question?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today and talking about this discussion. I'm also one of the interns, and I am a freshman at Penn State Harrisburg, where I am right now too, if you can see. But my first question, I would like to begin by asking, what actions can be taken at the federal and state level to combat social inequality? Thank you.
If I may, just maybe a few points. I want to piggyback off of something that Dr. Sessoms just touched on in the term of, getting skin in the game instead of performative allyship, making sure that you're getting skin in the game. And that doesn't mean like you have to be, in many cases, like, I know a lot of people that don't like to go to protests and don't like to go to marches. There are so many other things that you can do, like in your communities, to not be performative, but get that skin in the game. And when we put skin in the game, look what happened during COVID. When you had protests, where I attended many protests, where there were more white people marching for Black Lives Matter than Black folk out there, and putting skin in the game for the greater good, look what happened. We got, at the statewide level, legislation passed that helped when it came to holding police officers accountable, helped when it came to restructuring the reporting system statewide with the state police for the state of Pennsylvania, and it still needs work. But when people put skin in the game, that's when we see the results legislatively. And this goes to your question, Sarah. What can we do at a federal and statewide level? At a federal level, it's a mess. I mean, it's just an absolute mess. The fact that we haven't even gotten the John Lewis Civil Rights Act passed through federal Congress is absolutely just insane. But to answer your question, making sure your elected officials are being held accountable when it comes to voting rights, because voter ID laws are rooted in racism and inequity as well, or voter ID requirements that are being put up by our colleagues on the other side. So the best way that I would tell someone to, what can you do is, first, make sure you're calling your senators. Make sure you're calling U.S. Senator Pat Toomey from Pennsylvania, U.S. Senator Bob Casey. Those are our 2 U.S. senators, Governor Tom Wolf. And as a resident, making your voice heard in what you want to see legislatively done within Pennsylvania. Our state representatives in this area are Patty Kim. We have 2 possibly incoming state reps in Dauphin County, Justin Fleming and Dave Madsen. It is our responsibility as residents to hold our elected officials accountable. So if we want to see that legislative change, it's not just voting, it's what we do after voting in holding elected officials accountable, calling their offices, writing letters, requesting meetings, and if you are comfortable in doing so, attending protests, attending rallies, because there is a time and place for protests. But many people forget, it's not just about the protests, it's what we have to do after to keep that pressure up and keep our foot on the gas.
I couldn't agree more with Cole. And I just appreciate and value the work that you do as a young leader in that space. So continue to uplift you and your colleagues in that. It's a lot of weight that you carry. So I just honor you in that work. And the only thing I think I would add, and there's not much that I would add to that, is that this idea of community that happened during that period. And it's just interesting, Cole, when you bring up mostly it was a majority of white people out there, the skin in the game. So we're talking about skin in the game. We're talking about white people, right? Skin in the game for white people, dominant culture, people that have this socialized, like institutionalized power. Because we know in our society, if you've read The Sum of Us, phenomenal read, but she talks about that history. When she's like, I'm trying to really grapple with, why do we have these racial disparities? Why do we have these economic disparities? And she kept coming back to, when we racialize social issues, that it's a wrap. But we can see how it harms all of us, right? But it's a zero-sum game. And that's why people are saying to me, white people are saying to me, I'm okay with it as long as it doesn't take anything away from me. Because we believe in this zero-sum game, that if I give you something, it's going to take something away from me. When during the pandemic, we were just printing off money like it was a monopoly game, right? Like just printing things off. We don't know how we're going to get computers. All of a sudden, all these companies, right? But these are the things that I think about, like becoming innovative and thinking differently and really challenging our government, that we think that we have to do things in this way. It only has to be done this way. We can't do it any other way. And really looking at blowing up the system. The system's not working the way it needs to. So how can we be innovative in a way to challenge it in a way that works for all of us, not just some of us, not just the majority of us, because we know that the blueprint has always been on the backs of BIPOC people. And from those policies and laws, that we had to really shame America. And that's what happened with George Floyd, America was shamed once again, just like it was shamed during the civil rights movement when they were hosing down our little kids in the street. We get good and shame, we get good and embarrassed because we're the land of the free, home of the brave. And the world is looking at us like, what? How in the world are you supposed to be land of free, home of the brave? We get good and embarrassed. But that shame and guilt obviously only takes us so far. So going back to Cole's point, that idea of like the skin in the game, that you can see me as human, that you can see me that I am also failing. So more data to show that even though Black and brown people, like especially Indigenous people during COVID, all of these things, but how does it impact all of us? Where's the data on that impacts all of us? And I'm a data person because I'm a school psychologist, but also it does speak to some people. There is another leverage point where we can see how we're all being harmed for it as another leeway to get some of this work done.
Absolutely, Dr. Sessoms, completely agree. And if I could just add one more point off of that as well. For the high schoolers who are on this call, if you go to a school where you are not being taught civics, that is a problem and that is an issue and that is absolutely unacceptable. So I would encourage all of you also to get your skin in the game within your school districts and going to your school board meetings and saying, why am I not being given a class on civics and not just how our government works, but how I can utilize my voice going forward as I'm becoming more into adulthood. And you can do that just at your school districts, where you're from, wherever you go to school. Make sure you go to your school boards. If you're at a school district where you are not being taught about Black history, and I don't mean like the whitewash, Christopher Columbus was great and slavery happened, but now it's over and no, I'm talking about being taught true Black history, being taught true Native American history, being taught true Latino history. If you're in a school district that is not doing that, you can use your voice as a student by going to the school board meetings and demanding, we need to be taught this in schools, in our school. My classmates need to be taught this because, we have people not knowing what a governor is, not knowing what a state rep is. And how can one get skin in the game if right off the onset, you don't understand the game or what's going on or how it's structured? So I just wanted to add that point as well. But very good points, Dr. Sessom. Gosh, I always love being on panels with you. I really do.
You're so generative when you say things, because when you said getting skin in the game for our students, I've seen that happen in real time, right? Like working with our students, especially in high school, going to the school board and telling their story about their experience being in Black and brown bodies and being and part of the LGBT community and feeling erased and invisible. And that created a seismic shift and the opportunities for them to have programming, to have curriculum for them. It does make a shift, because we're not used to that. We're used to just playing by the game. But when you have people stand up, and who's doing it more than anything is our children, standing up and going to our elected officials and saying, we need you to do what you said you were here to do. But I've seen that, Cole, in real time. It does work.
Thank you, Dr. Sessoms and Mr. Goodman, for your input on that question. In the meantime,
you can just call me Cole, by the way. Mr. Goodman's my father.
That's true. I don't know. I've heard so many people call you Cole at this point. I was like, maybe Mr. Goodman's a nice little change. But essentially, I would like to open the floor to audience questions. You guys can use the Q&A feature to ask questions. And in the meantime, I think Sarah actually has another question that you can answer while people can get their questions into the question box.
Thank you for the amazing answers. That was a great response. And I would like to ask, so aside from the civics class, what is your perspective on mandating a class on mental health awareness, as well as on world religions to help combat social inequality and racism? I definitely agree with the civics class, by the way.
You're speaking my language, Sarah, right? Like, so that is big. So even thinking during COVID, right, we know that our BIPOC students, our LGBTQ students, were more likely to die by suicide, right? But we looked overall, right? If you look at that for a colorblind approach, overall suicide rates went down, but within our communities, they definitely were more profoundly impacted. So the idea of thinking about mental health and not this idea, right? So I want to be very clear when we talk about mental health and gun violence, we put those hand in hand. But my work was very particularly looking and working with crisis response. And just because you have depression, just because you have suicidal ideation does not mean that you're going to go in and shoot up a school, right? So this idea, we have to be really careful of this conversation that we're having about mental health and gun violence, that there can be a link, but that is not necessarily. People have mental health issues and they do not have the suicidal ideation. They do not have homicidal thoughts all the time. So that idea, I think, has given us a leverage point, but it's also a way to scapegoat the major issues that are going on. I'll leave that. I think you had that discussion before, but in terms of mental health, it's imperative. So within the district that I worked in, we trained over 1,200 staff just to even recognize the signs and be able to ask the question, right? Because oftentimes what they would do, staff would come to my office and say, well, I got this really disturbing poetry or like this really disturbing, they said something really disturbing to me and they left it go because I'm not a trained mental health professional. You're a human being. That student, right? They wrote something, they shared something with you because they trusted you, because that was a cry for help. So the part of the training is necessary to train our students, because oftentimes when I had to do suicide response, the students that were friends of the student who died by suicide would come and say, I thought he was joking. I didn't think he was serious. There's always signs. So recognizing those signs is imperative prevention. And that starts from elementary. So social emotional learning is being attacked right now in our schools because they're comparing it to CRT. It's social emotional learning. It's teaching us to care for our fellow brothers and sisters. Like it blows my mind that this is where we're going with it. But it's imperative that we learn the signs and that we learn to say, do you need help? Are you thinking about killing yourself? That question has released people and liberated people to tell the truth and then to get help, because now they feel like there's hope. When you're hopeless, there's no hope for you. When you feel like you're alone, that there's no community, that it's a stigma. So destigmatizing it allows us to have that conversation. So it is imperative. I found in districts, a lot of times it's our PE teachers that are having those conversations. And we have people at the legislative level, we have people in our government offices that are suicide prevention specialists that really push that. But in terms of it being something that is really universal and really taught at that level, we have to do a better job. Now, there is legislation. Every school has to have a policy for crisis prevention and suicide prevention, but how that is carried out can look very differently.
If I may add, sorry, Cole. But if I may add, I was recently diagnosed with type 1 bipolar disorder. And and now I realize the value and importance that mental health, the value and importance of a mental health class, that because I feel like so many people, everyone has their own unique struggles. And just to emphasize and to put out the importance there of mental health, because we don't know what anyone else may be struggling with. So just the importance of being kind to someone, being not being judgmental, being accepting, embracing someone. So I feel like that's very important, especially in the school community, because a student spends 8 hours there a day, and when they're faced with racism or teachers, and obviously there's education too, and that takes a big toll on students. So just emphasize, that's where the importance of a mental health class comes in, so other students can better understand what other students may be facing.
Yes, I agree. And I just honor you and thank you for just even disclosing that and being vulnerable enough to share with us your diagnosis, because you're putting a face to it and you're destigmatizing what it means to live with bipolar 1 disorder, right? So there's nothing wrong with you. It's just your brain works differently, and you have to learn to adapt and think of the world through your lens. But I appreciate you sharing that. And I think it's important for all of us that we know people in our lives, when we see someone that's struggling, that we reach out and we're able to give them resources. But I will always advocate for school psychologists. I'm the state president this year for School Psychology Association in Pennsylvania. Our school psychologists, our school social workers, our school counselors are amazing resources that you can go to and get support, and even at the college level, but also in terms of, Cole, and advocating and thinking about when we had the mass shootings before COVID and how we were talking about legislation and getting more mental health funding. And that went by the wayside because then we had COVID, which is like more the reason why we should have had it. But now we do have some funding. I know for school psychologists, we have internship stipends that we were able to get with this new, billions of dollars of money that we were able to get more school psychologists in the school, because there was a barrier for us to even get trained because you have to do a year-long internship. So there's things like that we can do systemically, looking at the system and how we're blocking barriers to even getting people in the field, and particularly people of color in the field and people from other intersecting identities that can help, because there are times, right, that I don't trust you because you don't look like me, because there's a system of oppression, there's a system of erasure and invisibility and harm that you cause, and I'm not going to talk to you. I've had that, right? They've had to call me in because a student wouldn't talk to anyone besides me. And that takes some work to build that trust. But if there's more people that know how to build relationships, and for some reason, right, because of our history of oppression, Black and brown people and people that come from these intersecting identities have that communal feel, right? We need more of that in the field, but I just appreciate you disclosing it and naming that as an issue that we need to really tackle within our educational system.
Thank you, Sarah, for sharing that, and thank y'all for your comments.
I'm sorry, Kennedy, could I just add one very quick thing? I also think what was important in your question as well is, I think world religion classes are so important. I coached the soccer team at John Harris, and I experienced and witnessed a situation where one boy, one of my boys is Muslim, and he was fasting, and one of the other boys was trying to get him to eat something that he could not eat, but the boy that was trying to get him to eat something didn't understand, one, that he was fasting or why he was fasting. So, and I had to come in and explain it and be like, look, pull him aside, just be like, look, he cannot eat that right now. I know you're trying to be sensitive in your own way. I know you're trying to be open and loving in your own way, but just understand the situation he's in right now. And maybe later down the road, he'll happily eat what you made. So I think world religion classes will go hand in hand with understanding cultural sensitivity, which can also help with mental health awareness. Because if you are, sorry, my cat was like nudging my screen and I was just like, please get down. If you are culturally sensitive to someone, that can help their mental health immensely. In having also someone know that, they feel understood and they feel heard. And I know I've been in that position living overseas, and I've seen it also here, to my boys that I coach as well.
I would agree when I'm sorry.
See, we just kind of jump in, Kennedy. This is a conversation. No, I agree. And Cole, thank you for bringing it back to that, because Sarah, I forgot to mention that part of the conversation. But to your point, also with the cultural humility, cultural sensitivity, but I also believe that when you are looking at other religions, other ethnic groups, other ways of living and being, there's also some commonalities that you can find there. There's some truths that you can find in there. And I think that we need to focus on that as well, because when we started looking at, like, when we think about like is CRT in schools and culturally responsive pedagogy and all of these things, we started looking at, well, this is how this community does things. And it becomes very like stereotypical and like, oh, well, that they all are the same way. And no one's a monolith. So I think that is super important. Yes, we do need to know about when you are fasting, and all of those things are super important. It's also really important to be like, but I am a human being and so are you. And that commonality as well. So I am starting to infuse a lot of that in my work, so that I am of the majority religion, that I'm a Christian, but looking at other spiritual practices and my work and how there's a common thread. Do I get a lot of backlash on that? Sometimes I do, because then you're not really a Christian if you're looking at those things. But I think those things are important because it brings a sense of community and connection, that you are not like some foreigner, you're not way off in your thinking or idea. There's such a common link there that we can learn from Eastern practices, that we don't have it all together. And we always get very much like Eurocentric, like America is the only way to be. It's not true. Yeah, great point,
Wait, very good point, Dr. Sessoms. Like if for this whole conversation, if everyone watching, takes a point or a phrase, Dr. Sessoms said it and hit the nail on the head. I am human, and so are you. And I think that especially Americans, we are so entrenched in our culture, our cultural norms, which, we should expect anyone else to respect, our culture as long as it's not hurting anyone or infringing on human rights. But, little cultural norms. But when it comes to like us respecting, and I say us as Americans, not us as individually on this call, but those who are American on this call, we are a very closed-minded society. I'm just gonna put, we're very closed-minded, and I think it's important that we get our culture, our community, our region to get to that point of what Dr. Sessoms said. I am human, and so are you, comma, I am human, so are you, and I want to learn about your culture, about your experiences, because that should be the human way. That should be the way that we are setting the example of. And great point, Dr. Sessoms. I love
difference
that.
is not bad. Difference just is, right? I always talk about, like, I have 2 Australian Labradoodles. The most ridiculous bougie dogs, takes 4 hours to groom. I don't know what I was thinking. But we talk about, everyone has like, oh, I have a Boston Terrier. I have all these different dogs. We have variation in grass, trees, cattle, and we get to people and we're like, you only can be this way as a human being. And we are the most complex creatures on the planet. It boggles my mind. So thinking about that it's not, difference is not bad. It just is. And that I can learn from you, that who you are innately and your lived experience is the wisdom that I need to make this generation, this world what it needs to be. But if you're hiding that because you've been told to be small, because you haven't felt safe to be yourself, we're missing out on all that wisdom and beauty that you have for our world, right? Like, how do we capitalize on that? How do we cultivate that?
And that love that you're talking about has to, just one more point, and I know we have other questions, extend to every facet of what we're going through as a community. So I saw a lot during COVID, there was a strong apprehension, especially from different sects of communities in our community, to get vaccinated. And yes, we had misinformation going on everywhere. And it is our job as leaders, as young leaders, as human beings, to make sure that our fellow people are also getting protected and loved in that way as well. So, and we also have seen, and this is a whole other subject, a lot of inequities when it comes to post-COVID, with Black and Brown communities in many cases getting less resources and less information, and when it came to post-pandemic. But that's a whole other conversation. I know we have other questions. I just want to put that point in.
Yeah, before we get to the questions, I did just want to add one thing. I think the key here is like being intentional within our steps. That's like one of my keywords for the years, intentionality. And I think moving with purpose and giving grace unto other people, like extending that same grace, love, and kindness unto other people. Because essentially, once you create equality, supremacy no longer exists in some forms. So I do think that it is of utmost importance that we do extend that same grace and love to one another, because essentially it will allow us to cultivate an environment of prosperity for all communities, hopefully.
Kennedy, you just gave the benediction and we have, like 15 minutes left.
I'm sorry. Okay. So our question, I'm so sorry. From Ms. Joyce, she said, are the traditional organizations such as NAACP still relevant and engaged in today's struggle?
Look at Cole's face.
Tell the truth.
I'm gonna let Cole.
Okay.
You said NAACP and other state organizations?
Well, what I'm saying is, we have our traditional organizations that really did have a role in my day during the civil rights struggle. I mean, they were out there, right? But I do wonder, what are we doing now? What are these organizations, the NAACP, the Southern Poverty, not Southern Poverty, because they're doing reports, but there are others that were in that vanguard in the civil rights movement. And I just don't see them as engaged today. I wonder, I might be wrong though.
I think that's valid. And what I think about, I'm trying to think of the book that I read. They were talking about this very thing, about this idea of like how even our Black churches or communities, like how that used to be a social hub for social political like freedom, and it's no longer that. And it's really become this discourse like during the Reagan era and all these things of that we can be colorblind, that we no longer have to be the special projects, because they looked at civil rights legislation as like, oh, you're the special favorites and you had to get all these handouts. And we've heard that time and time again. You still hear that language, very much Democrats, or you just want to give things away. I hear it in the meetings that I'm in all the time. But that rhetoric has continued, and that started to dissolve things, that we don't have to put funding in. We don't have to do that. We don't have to have these things. Like, we have arrived. We are now in a post-racial society. So from that perspective of the author, they were looking at it historically as like that rhetoric has dissolved a lot of these organizations, that they no longer have the footing they had before, because now we're looking at it as though we're a post-racial society and everyone's fine. We had a Black president, like, but not really looking at the data to show that. So we really dismantled a lot of those community supports. But I know probably in some regions, it's probably really effective, really affluent, and really thriving. But it's just interesting you asked that question, because someone reached out to me the other day and asked for support and who they should reach out to. Yeah. But we had to do a better job. I even think about me being a state president and also being a vice chair of another organization, that when you get into this work, are you really going back to your vision and values and your mission? And how do you sway from that? And now when you're in these positions, sometimes they can look, I'm not speaking for anyone else, but just looking at people getting into some of these positions, that it's a power thing. It's a good look. It looks good on your resume. It looks good on your CV. But I do wonder, but that was the historical line that they were saying, that because of that rhetoric, it has really dissolved a lot of these organizations, that they are no longer effective. So no longer getting the funding, no longer getting the support that they need, because we're now in a post-racial society.
Yeah, absolutely. And my point was going to be, Dr. Sessoms, what you said more later in your comment of when one gets into this type of work. I'm not even just saying politics or NAACP. It could be school psychology. It could be working with our kids. It could be activism. It could be joining the NAACP. And this is a broad statement. We have too many people who are just interested in sitting back with their titles instead of actually doing the nitty gritty, not fun, not glamorous work that many people won't see on camera that is needed to be done, and needed to be done by public servants. And public servants, when I say that, I don't just mean elected officials. I mean, if you're stepping out to, join an NAACP or such, you are doing a service to the public. So we have to get away from, in many of such organizations, people who want to hold on to a position for self-grandizement and self, helping self instead of helping us. It's not my favorite quote. My favorite quote, one I live by, is Bernie Sanders' campaign motto: "Not me, us." And that's what it really has to be about, I think, to get some of those organizations on the right footing of becoming more relevant and prevalent in today's society moving forward. And then also, there aren't very many young people that I hear that are just clamoring to join the NAACP these days. And that's just my honest answer. Of the many I talk to, I just do not hear. And I'm not a member, so I cannot speak upon the organizations, like what they need to do, because I'm not involved as much in it, but just as a community member, I think that times are changing and the way to reach people needs to change as well.
Dr. Sessoms, we can't hear
My
you.
gosh, I keep muting my mic. This is terrible. You would think, how many years have we been doing this? But I got this new, like, see this nice, beautiful mic, and I keep pushing the mute button. Now, what was I saying? It reminds me, what you were saying reminds me of Eddie Glaude's book, Democracy in Black, where he talks about this head Negro in charge, this mentality of, like, you think of Al Sharpton. So he's a colleague and a friend of Al Sharpton, but he criticizes him. And that's what we need when we are leaders. We need to have that critique and people to call us in. And he says, you know, he's doing all these protests. One thing is that protests worked back in the civil rights era, but is that the most effective way presently to really effectuate change? Because there were so many facets of why that worked then, because even us being Black people being on the sidewalk and taking up space was even against the law. So even all those things, he talks about that, but he also talks about this idea that we have the one, you know, we had this stereotype like magical Negro, the head Negro in charge that can be in charge, like Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, and that no one else can fall in those ranks. And he's talking about, we have these grassroots movements. We have students like you who are our leaders that we don't even open up and give access to because we look at you as just little kids and you don't know what you're talking about. He's like, step aside, you know, because really what they're doing is just performative. It's like they're doing the rallies, they're doing all this, but they want the limelight. And you're doing it because you really are in the very bare bones, the roots of it, really wanting to change our society. So we have to move that aside as well. Stop looking at like who can be the face of it. There doesn't have to be one face anymore.
Thank you for your answer, your snippet. I literally, when you were saying that, I just watched Mr. Rice's face and Mr. Goodson's face just had an explosion for you.
It's huge.
So,
because she's like, I'm tired.
Yeah. We've officially entered our final 10-ish minutes of our panel. So I was just wondering if you and Mr. Goodman could say some words on your final ending words about what people can do to raise their voices against social inequality.
I spoke last. I feel like I should turn it back to you, Cole. Raising your, I mean, forming community like you're forming, I think it's so imperative. A lot of my work and my dissertation was focusing on this idea of like not safe spaces, but having these caucuses, having these groups that you can just confirm and contest your ways of knowing. When you're in these spaces, it makes you feel like you're not alone, that you are not quote unquote crazy, right? Like, that's what society makes you think, that when you see these injustices, when you have this righteous rage, that there's something wrong with you, that you're too sensitive. But when you come in these spaces, what it does a couple of things. It helps you develop the discourse to really develop like what you're trying to say and how you're trying to say it. And being in these communities, it gives you the opportunity to test it out, try it out. People can be like, I get where you're coming from, or like, oh my gosh, like I've been waiting for that to unlock for me. Another way that I found things that unlock and develop that discourse is reading, right? Like I've been referencing, I have this entire wall of books, but that's been helping me to develop this discourse. You know, James Baldwin talked a lot about that when he was in his anger and his rage. And he's like, books help to unlock and give me the language that I needed to be able to articulate what I could say. But that work starts with me first. I had to do my own self-interrogation, and that's ongoing. Like I'm 41 and I finally got a Black female therapist for the first time in my life. And it has been life-changing because I was like, listen, I know how this works. I'm a psychologist, so I need someone to get with me, right? It wasn't working in Central PA. I had to go elsewhere. But those are the kind of things I had to do, be able to self-interrogate myself before I can really say anything else about the world. If I'm not doing the work myself, how dare I go out and criticize? And that is ongoing work. So it starts with self. That isolation and being alone, Bell Hooks talked a lot about that self-love you have to develop, and that isolation, it's super scary because in community, I can hide who I really am. I can wear the mask, but in that isolation, I can really get to the root of who I am and the stories that I've told myself. But doing that community is super important. So you have to do both of those in tandem. So more of what you're doing to develop the discourse and be as a caucus. So as I'm coming together, people often think that people that look alike, that have the same mindset, are the woke people or are the sensitive people, and they just want to get together and complain. But we're getting together to look how we can effectuate change, how we can develop policies and practices and procedures and change the way that we do things, that we can freedom dream, we can think of the world a different way. It gives you the freedom to think about that in a different way when you have those spaces. So that is by far most paramount, and nothing's off the table, right? Nothing's off the table. So freedom dream and dream away. And then you will get to the way that you can solve the problem, but it doesn't have to be the only way, but the way that you look at the world and envision it because of your lived experience is what's necessary. The way I look at it is necessary. The way Cole looks at it is necessary, but we have to do that in community, but we have to also do that individual work, that self-interrogation.
Cole, your last remarks.
This conversation has been wonderful. It's spoken a lot of things in me that I needed to hear. You know, when you're in the fight, you know, every day, when Dr. Sessoms is in the fight every day, there are things, you know, when you get in these conversations, as Dr. Sessoms was saying, there are just things that because of discourse and conversation that can really just lift a community up, lift you up. And I appreciate and have lifted me up today. And I really appreciate the conversation. I just want to say that, you know, for all the young people that are watching the call, all of our more seasoned citizens who are watching the call, and to our high schoolers who are on this call, you are the future. You are the future, and if we are going to change this country, this community, this fabric going forward, it's going to take all of us. And as I said in the beginning, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. So in a marathon, we all get tired. We all get weary. And for those who have been fighting against social injustice for longer, years, decades more than I have, it astounds me that many haven't quit, because it is very hard, but we can't. If we want a better country, a better society, if we want to amplify voices across the nation, it's going to take all of us. It's going to take all of us. One, everyone needs to get out and vote. If you are 18 years old or older, everyone needs to be registered and everyone needs to get out and vote. Two, encourage your friends who are around you to register to vote. That's step two, because the more the better. And the more people that get out and vote, the more we can, as I said, put people in places where we can get cultural sensitivity training, religious classes, many things that we've discussed today. And three, make sure that your social injustice and fighting social injustice radar is on all the time. And I know that is very hard to do, especially for brown and Black persons, but it's a marathon, not a sprint. And we can do it, and we can get a better society, and we can get a better country. And we've faced many setbacks in the past few months, I know, and I'm tired. But when we've joined together, you know, united we stand and divided we will fall. So thank you for having me, Dr. Sessoms. It's always great to be on a panel with you. You're just so amazing. And thank you for what you do for our kids, like across the state and the community. And thanks for inviting me for the panel. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Sessoms and Mr. Cole Goodman. Okay, I said Cole this time, so you got that going for you. I would like to thank you on behalf of all the interns at the World Affairs Council for coming today and talking on our panel for social inequality. I feel terrible that Mr. Lassiter couldn't make it today, but we will come back later so we can talk to him then. I would like to hand it off to Hannah to give us some closing remarks.
Yeah, thanks, Kirthana. Thank you, Cole and Dr. Sessoms. That conversation, I think, is one we need to be having on a daily basis. And I think it's such an important conversation. I'm so glad we could have it today. And I want to thank Kennedy and Kirthana for leading it, and just fielding all these questions. So we are now going to have another quick 15-minute break. Like this morning, if you were here for our earlier sessions, we will have a little interactive game during this time. So feel free to stick around on this call and enjoy that. And then we will be back at 2:15 for our final panel of the day. Thank you.